I'm out for a walk, miles from home. Trying to get to some place that's like, seems like it would be pretty cool to see. Weather was supposed to be a little bit nicer. I don't mind the cold. I don't mind the wind. Too bad that it's so cloudy because it's supposed to be pretty up here. Yeah, it was supposed to be sunny today. What the heck? So, I don't like to ever say anything before I do it, because what happens if I can't do it? It's part of the lovely legacy of my family. Even if it was something that totally sucked, they would come back and hound me over and over again. How come you haven't finished that thing? Whatever it was that I said I was going to do. And it's usually when I'm at my, sort of like teetering toward being on my worst, they'll be like, let me try and push you over the edge and remind you of this thing that you said you were going to do that you just didn't do. Because I'm not allowed to change my mind. I'm not allowed to say something and not do it because that's considered a lie in my family. It's not even a failure, it's a lie. Anyway. So I feel weird about making this video. But then again, I'm in the middle of nowhere where there's no internet access. So this video could very easily just disappear. I think it's time to discuss with my therapist stopping therapy. It's been like a year and a half. That's a pretty good run. The problem is that's gone so far off course. When you join therapy, when you start therapy, you need to have a goal in place of why you're there. My goal is to find more adaptive coping techniques for living with avoidant personality disorder. And I found 2 since I've done this therapy. And I think that's pretty good, because I've been around the block and I've had this for a long time, and new things that I haven't tried before, that's rare. The first one was travel, which actually, guess what? I'm doing sort of right now. I was worried it wasn't sustainable. I was worried about the financial issue of how to pay for traveling all the time. Nobody, I'm sure, could have predicted that the entire world would shut down due to disease, but same effect. Some kind of funky scat. Anyway, sorry, that was probably gross. I'm like, ooh, animals out here. I think it would be really interesting to see a moose. I've never actually seen a moose in the wild. I've seen them in rehab centers, which basically zoos. Anyway, that was the first one. Very effective. The second one was stunningly effective. It's worked like a rescue inhaler almost. Was coffee. Stunning. And I read an article that it's actually been, studied and scientifically proven. Okay, I just stepped next to it, but that's my footprint. That is that is a moose hoof print. So there are moose around here. Cool, maybe I'll see one and not get squished or battered to death. Anyway, so yeah, using coffee sparingly, and other caffeine doesn't work. Oh, it's really starting to snow. Very effective. However, that looks like dog. It might be a deer, but I think that's a dog. I'm not a track expert. Anyway, I don't know who I talked about this. I talked about this to people. I doubt very much that I put it online because it was bothering me and it's embarrassing. But the place where I go to get my coffee, listen to those trees. Just don't follow me. The place I go to get my coffee, the reason I go there is because it is self-service 100%. All you do to interact with people is to actually, pay for the cup. And the guy behind the counter asked me out. And it took forever for me to get it, that's what was happening. Because of course, that's ridiculous, right? And it was awkward and terrible, and I turned the guy down, and then he just started raging at me. And so mad, and it's like, he was working his job. There were other customers in the place, raging at me saying, it's because I'm vertically challenged, isn't it? I mean, it would have been hilarious, like really, really funny, except it was also really, really scary. Here comes wind. And, yeah. So I tell this to my therapist. I mean, this is trauma, is what this is. And this guy, my therapist, is like, oh, so somebody likes you and blah, 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 and tell me about the guy and what does he look like and everything. I'm like, dude, you don't get it at all. No coping techniques to deal with this. The only coping technique I have is never go into the place again. Okay, that's cool. That means I'm also knocking out another one of my coping techniques because that means I can't get coffee. I was like, oh yeah, but I can't get coffee there. And there's ice coming off these trees. Anyway, and he, my therapist, he's like, well, just go get coffee at another place. And I'm like, I couldn't even articulate it to say, no, that's the problem. If I could just go to any coffee place and get coffee, I wouldn't even be in therapy. And the other thing that he does is he's like, when he finally gets it, that there's like an issue, then he'll be like, okay, here's a solution, do this. And then he's just like, okay, so you did that, right? And I'm like, what the hell is wrong with you? The people who know I've been on my trips know that some of them are snap pretty quick. Like I went to Africa with 6 weeks notice. That is highly unusual. That's kind of crazy. That somebody could just, boom, go do that. Normal people can't. I guess he assumes that I can also just, boom, go do whatever. Anything else. Go to a different coffee shop. What he's forgetting, and again, I understand there are different types of avoidant personality disorder, and mine is the type where I can tolerate strangers. Other people, that's the worst thing imaginable. But that's the difference. Africa, I am never, ever, ever, ever going to run into anybody that I saw there ever again. It's impossible unless I actually somehow went back and happened to run into the same people in a city of millions, I mean, the chances are so tiny, it's not going to happen. As opposed to getting coffee at some place in where I live, where I could become a regular, and they're like, oh, here's your regular order. And then, God forbid, I know this is nuts, but I feel like I disappoint somebody if I wanted something different from my regular order. Or if I, actually that was the problem with the guy that asked me out. He was like, hey, I haven't seen you for a couple of weeks. Well, guess what? That's because I didn't need a coffee for a couple of weeks. But then I'm like, oh God, I'm being watched and monitored and everything else. I mean, it's awful. And my therapist doesn't get that and is hell-bent on, yes, it is true that basically the only cure is a long-term good relationship. However, that's not going to happen for me. So, the other thing that's a big problem is, and now I feel like I should put up a disclaimer that will also feel very vain, to say, I understand that people feel different from me, but I feel pretty strongly that I'm like toxic, okay, to people. And if they get too involved in me, then I will, make bad things happen to them. And so if I think that somebody is kind of sort of getting like too close, I cut them out for their own safety. I mean, I'm sure that is partially on me too, but that's the thing. For me, I don't do anything for myself. I do it for other people. Ooh. Okay, first of all, this is mucky. This, I wonder if it's going to work, is a classic Maine sort of bridgey thing that they put logs down, and then, do you see how it's kind of a bridge? See me die here, fall into the muck, which doesn't seem to be happening. Okay, how do I get over there? I can totally see myself losing my balance. The wind doesn't help. I did it. Okay. Sorry, that was probably ridiculous. Anyway. So yeah. So my therapist doesn't get that and is actually making things worse. Because if he does start pushing and saying, hey, well, what about this other person in your life? What I'll do, I will leave. Somebody asked me, well, what's going to happen now that, this is not my therapist, somebody asked me, what's going to happen now that this happened, that you got asked out by your coffee guy, and that now you can't get access to coffee if you get stressed. And you know what my immediate reaction? Oh, I'll quit my job. That's how I think. If I can't handle the stress, I can't go to somewhere else. And I don't have these coping techniques. So my therapist is kind of pushing for me to not be avoidant and to try to see that other people don't see me the same way I do. I'm aware of that on an intellectual sort of basis, but not on an emotional, which feels like logical way. So I don't need to have that told to me. And if people are made examples of and said, hey, well, this person, is involved in your life not because there's nobody else, but because they want you to be involved in their life. Now, if that gets hammered home, again, then I'm like, oh, well, that's a good person. And that person deserves to have decent people in their life. Therefore, I need to get out of their life because I am not good. So my therapist is not only not helping with what I need out of therapy, which is to find more adaptive coping techniques, but is actively making things worse by pushing against, an immovable rock that's just weakening my foundations. If you build a house around a 100-pound or 100-ton, that's better, 100-ton stone that's poking out of the side of a mountain, you're definitely more likely to smash down the house before you take down that rock. And my therapist doesn't get that. So that's where I am. Well, I'm also out in the middle of the woods. But I'm seriously considering stopping therapy for that reason. I don't know. Maybe my therapist will come back with a counter argument. Maybe. I doubt it. Anyway. Now I have to find some place where there's internet so I can upload this and continue my walk through the woods. Bye.